my name's Dan Kinjorski. I'm your host for the Journey podcast, and this is my co-host, Ms. Crystal Barbosa. And please subscribe to PathfinderMediaGroup.org as well as our podcast, The Journey. We would very much appreciate that. Today, we're going to continue our talk with the Gottman series. And what are we going to talk about today?
So we've already talked about love maps, which is the first level of the sound relationship house.
Okay.
And we've talked about the fondness and admiration, being fond of one another and showing your love. Today, we're going to talk about turning towards one another rather than turning away from one another. And so it seems very simple, but it's a very big thing that a lot of couples struggle with. And it has to do with bids. Bids are things that are ways that each couple tries to get the other person's attention. And there are two ways to respond to a bid. You can either respond to it. For example, if your spouse is like, I had a really rough day today, instead of just not saying anything or maybe turning away and just ignoring the situation or saying something negative like, oh, well, I had a rough day too.
Right.
Just going to minimize her feelings is tell me more about your day is a better reaction to the bid because it's allowing more of a communication, more of a connection, and that's what we're trying to do with every step. It's a way to get you connected a little bit deeper, a little bit closer to your spouse.
Okay. When you're talking about turning towards another, you're not really referring to, and I have to break it down a little further for some of us to understand that.
Sorry.
It's not actually turning towards someone, but it's actually an emotional response of turning, like you said, hearing the other, and not just hearing, but responding to the other. And I think the example you said that you hear that I had a bad day. Well, tell me more about it versus, man, I did too. It really sucked or whatever.
Yeah.
But turning towards another is actually responding emotionally and connecting emotionally with someone.
Yeah, and it's these little steps that people don't realize are connected to that intimacy and that trust and all of those things that a lot of people are desiring and are struggling with in their relationships. But if we're not turning towards one another when we're having an issue, if we're not responding to our partner's bidding when they're trying to get our attention, it's just going to keep pulling us further and further apart.
So turning towards the other, responding,
yeah,
right.
In a kind way, obviously.
In a kind way.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you yourself seen any good examples of where maybe years ago when you started this journey yourself of not counselors but clients not responding that way, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so a lot of times we have couples that respond in a way when they're listening, they're not listening to listen, to understand what's going on, they're listening to respond. And that is something that even I've been guilty of. Sometimes, depending on our upbringing, on what we've seen our parents or our adults, our guardians, how they dealt with situations is what we're likely to behave like.
Right.
And so for myself, I know I've done the same thing where we're listening to respond and we don't even understand what we did wrong, but if we just slow down, and one of the things is really to think before you speak. I know it sounds so mundane and easy, but if we slow down and think before we speak, there's a higher chance that what we do say, those little small things will add up, but they'll be good things rather than all these bad things are adding up, because it is like a love bank.
Right.
We do have each of us have a love bank, and we want to try to instill a little bit of love into each other.
Right.
But oftentimes when there's especially these younger couples that have only been married a couple years, they get over that honeymoon phase.
Right.
And they think, oh, what's going on? This is not what it was. This is all bad stuff. And so they start saying things that are more negative. They start going down this road of just, we're not the same, things are different, you don't love me the same way, you're not paying attention to me the same way.
Right.
But they're not communicating that. Instead, a lot of times these younger couples, they start turning away.
Right.
Instead of, hey, why don't you give me this attention? I miss you. They instead go, well, they're not giving me attention. They're on their TV or they're on their game all the time. I'm just going to be ignored, and I guess that's just the way it is.
Right.
but it's important to communicate those things.
Right. And, when you say that people are listening to respond, let's break that down and let's take a look at what that looks like.
Yeah.
When I'm talking to my wife and she says something to me, and while she's talking to me and I'm thinking of how to defend myself, that is what I'm doing. I'm listening to respond. When our loved one is speaking to us and we're thinking about how are we going to defend ourselves, then that is listening to respond.
Oh, yeah.
That's a negative.
Oh, yeah. And that's perfect because that's a different type of bid. And sometimes we might put a bid, but it might be in a negative tone.
Right.
It might be perceived in a negative way depending on the words, and that will automatically put, like you said, you on the defensive.
Right.
And so that's why when we do have bids, we also have to be careful in the tone and in the wording that we use it, because your partner, you might say something like, oh, would it kill you to just throw your clothes in the dirty hamper instead of leave them on the floor? That's in a negative connotation. If you could have had that connection instead of saying, hey, just so you know, it stresses me out every time I see your clothes on the floor.
Right.
Again, I statements, we're talking about how I'm feeling, we're talking about my emotions versus you're doing something wrong, I'm going to have you go on the defensive.
Right, right. When we, and I just had a thought there, it is about I statements too. That's one way to respond positively.
Yeah.
Versus reacting. I think a lot of times, sometimes the respond reaction kind of gets backwards. Sometimes we listen to react, or maybe to respond, but in a negative way.
Yeah.
In a sense, in essence, we're reacting to maybe a perceived accusation from, for instance, my wife. I'm reacting, and I need to respond in a kind way to her versus a negative way.
Yeah. And a big thing that Gottman talks about when it comes to the bids is to take that pause and look for the bid in your partner's statement. Sometimes, like you said, we are so ingrained into responding, defending ourselves, depending on our upbringings or our past relationships, that we are not listening. But we're going to miss that bid because it could be said in a very negative way.
Right.
Like they said earlier, I wish you'd just take away your clothes, you pick up your clothes from the floor.
Right.
And you could just go into defense mode and go, oh my gosh, well, you're always complaining about me leaving clothes on the floor. Right. Or you could look into it and go, this is really bothering my partner. If they're bringing it up, this must really bother my partner. And so seeing that bid within all that negative stuff, it takes time because in the beginning you're in defense mode. But down the road, eventually, when your partner gives a bid that might not be as pleasant, you'll see the bid within that unpleasant comment. And that's where our goal is to get to.
Right. And do you see that some people, when they make a bid, how important is it facial expressions?
Yeah. So,
how important is that? Is that part of the bid? If we're our body language, I think that's the word I was looking for.
Perfect.
Is body language part of a bid?
Oh, yes.
And a response?
Yes.
It's important.
It's very important. And it can, even if you sigh, a sound of a sigh can be a part of the body language that you're giving your partner. So if you're going to say, something like, I wish you did all these things, or if your partner asks you, can you go do this? There's a lot. It's just a sigh, but you can perceive a lot from it. And so same thing with your body language. If you're rolling your eyes, if you're turning your body away from your partner, these are all little things, but it's going to give your partner all this information on how you're feeling about the conversation and towards them.
Right. And I guess the best way to respond is the I feel statements. I think to bring two hearts together, I think it's important that we have to make ourselves vulnerable. Yeah. I know we're going over some things we've talked about before, but this is very important.
Oh, yeah.
When we're talking about what's the subject?
This is all about bidding and turning towards rather than away.
Yeah, turning towards another.
Yeah.
So I think it's about it's just as important about connecting emotionally, and in order to do that, we have to make ourselves vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We have to. I mean, if you're not willing to make yourself vulnerable to the other person,
Yeah.
it's going to be harder, much harder to connect emotionally.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the other problem is that a lot of times when people are trying to do these bids and they're trying to decipher what it could possibly be, a lot of times we don't know what our partner wants.
Right.
We can't read their mind. So we got to remember that if our partner is possibly giving out a bid, but we're not sure what it is that they want,
Right.
just ask. That's the simplest thing, is just to ask.
I was just thinking that. What do you need right now?
Yeah.
You know?
And sometimes it's the easiest question, but for some reason, so many of my couples are so afraid to just ask the simplest thing is, what do you need? What do you want? What do you mean by this? Instead of taking it personal and going, oh, well, you're always complaining that I leave my clothes on the floor. Well, how about, well, what do you mean by this? Maybe I'm taking it the wrong way. And that goes hand in hand with all the things that we've been working on, continues to improve on the way we're communicating with one another.
Yeah. I think it's important that we find out. It's important that we check for clarification. Like, what do you mean by this? Is an important question.
Yeah.
Help me understand what you're
That's a
trying to
great
say.
one. Yeah.
Help me understand, because I don't want to misunderstand what you're trying to say to me right now.
Oh, yeah.
So help me understand this.
Yeah.
And so that is in a sense turning towards the other, is when you ask for clarification. Help me understand what you're saying.
Yeah, rather than getting offended or not understanding it and turning away.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
There were two obstacles, though, that Gottman talks about when it comes to receiving these bids. One is that oftentimes, like I was saying, we might misinterpret the bid. We might take offense. We might take it personal. So we always suggest ask for clarification. The other one is that sometimes we're just too distracted in our own lives. That's a big problem we have, especially nowadays with all the electronics that we have in life. A lot of our couples, they struggle putting their phones down. They struggle turning off the game. They struggle turning off the TV.
Right.
And so we're not getting that connection that we used to have because we have so many distractions. And so I tell my couples that when we're doing the homework exercises, like the speaker listener exercise that we have done before and talked about, but little things like that, we need to ensure that we are fully there with our partner, because we might miss a bid because we were messing with our phone. We might miss a bid because we were watching TV. And so when we're having those conversations, we try, especially in the beginning, when you're just learning to really listen, because we're not learning to remember. Before we were listening to respond, and now we're just actually listening to what our the emotions that our partner's giving us.
Right.
Turn off that phone. Turn off that TV.
Right.
Have a full conversation, because otherwise you're going to miss that bid. And not only that, but it's so sort of disrespectful if you're trying to have that conversation and the entire time you're on your phone.
Right.
And a lot of my generation, especially in the generation below, we are hardwired on our phones. We are hardwired on the phones and on YouTube and everything. And it's all good and great in its own capacity, but right now it's one of the biggest things that is driving a wedge on our younger couples.
Right. That reminds me, I'd like to do something on parenting in the future podcasts, but because we're talking about technology and distractions and so forth. So one day we're going to do that in the future.
That would be good.
This idea of the first obstacle is what again? So
the first obstacle is missing a bid because it's been maybe wrapped up in a negative tone or in a negative body language.
All right.
And then the second one is being distracted.
Being
distracted by the world. And it could be, personal things that you're just so involved in that you forget that you have a wife or a husband that you guys need to work things out with.
Right. Yeah. And let's back up here for a second. And we can be so distracted in life. I know I have been, even recently, because you're juggling so many things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Whether it's dissertation, therapy practice,
kids,
grandkids, all you're juggling all these things. It's easy to be distracted in today's day and age. It's not just technology, but it's our mind too as well. And the lack of self-care. We're not taking care of ourselves a lot of times. So self-care is important, and a lot of people don't understand that concept. To you, what is self-care?
Self-care is taking that time that you need for just you.
Right.
Nothing that has any responsibility, nothing that you have to, be cautious of. There's just you, your
Right.
time, you winding down,
Right.
and just taking care of you. So for me, I like painting. That's my thing. I like painting and I like writing.
Okay.
So painting or writing, that just clears my mind. I kind of get everything that's in my mind off.
Uh-huh.
And I've always told my clients, just get whatever is in your mind out of and put it on paper. As long as it's not on your mind anymore and it's on paper, it's halfway gone. It's halfway processed.
Right. Right. I like reading. I do like writing, but I just don't find myself doing a whole lot of that right now. So, except for dissertation material. Okay. But I think, too, one of the things I got out of this last few minutes here
Yeah.
is this idea of being present. Being present. We are so not mindful, but in our culture today, it's important. What we perceive as important is doing, and doing.
Yeah.
We are so into this idea. I have to do this for so and so. I have to do this. I have to do this. But we forget this idea of just being present.
Yeah.
Just being present. The other day, Maribel was sitting and laying down, just watching some TV, and then I sat and I was at the kitchen table and I was doing some things on my computer, and there was a physical separation, if you will.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I went and we have a love seat that has recliners. So I went and I just laid down and I was right beside her. She was doing what she's doing and I'm doing what I'm doing on my laptop, but we're right beside each other. I moved closer to her to be near her.
Yeah.
And so being present, not having to do anything, or not worry about doing anything.
Yeah.
It goes back to Mary and Martha in the Bible. They talk about, one of them was busy doing things, preparing things. The other one was busy with the leader, Jesus, and, spending time with him. The other one was doing, the other one was being.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we as couples learn on our journey, right? My wife and I, you and your husband, on our journey, even as single people, is learning just to be.
Yeah.
And that's why we offer counseling here at Pathfinder, because a lot of people don't know how to be.
Yeah.
So if you really want to know how to be yourself, right?
Be in the moment.
Be in the moment.
Yeah.
Pathfinder Counseling Group offers counseling and therapy for that purpose.
Now we got so many sessions available, so call now.
All right, right, exactly. So, is there any more to this section?
Nope, this is it for this section. And the next one that we're going to do, besides that kind of builds upon the turning away or turning towards, is letting your partner influence you. And so what that's going to be is letting your partner add information, finding that middle ground with your partner.
Right.
And so that's going to be the important part for our next session, is communicating to find that middle ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm your host, Dan Konjorski from the Journey Podcast, and this is your co-host, Crystal Barbosa. We're both here at the Pathfinder Counseling Group, and Josh is behind the camera. We appreciate Josh here today, and we hope that you enjoyed this podcast. Please, again, subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to Pathfinder Media Group and Pathfinder Counseling Group. We appreciate you all. Thanks for being with us.